Hello again everybody, and welcome back to the second part of the saga on this 2013 Mac Pro trash can. Now, if you haven't seen the first video on this particular machine, what happened was I bought this from CEX for £170, making it one of the cheapest Mac Pros you can actually buy in the UK with a warranty of all things. And some interesting things transpired when the machine actually arrived on my doorstep. So if you want to find out what happened, go and look at the previous video, which I've linked in the description, and hopefully you'll enjoy that as much as you'll enjoy this one. Now, as I alluded to in the previous video, today we're going to upgrade this machine and see what kind of extra power we can get out of it on a bit of a budget. Now, that's going to involve upgrading the CPU to an 8-core one and upgrading the SSD to an Intel P660 1TB unit. But wait, I hear you ask, why did you go for an 8-core CPU and not a 12-core? So there's a few reasons for my particular thought process here. First off, I wanted to keep my single-core performance as high as possible, and the 12-core chips, obviously they are kind of clocked at a lower base speed, so the single-core performance, which is, as we all know, really important, not everything is multi-threaded, would be a bit lower, and that would actually probably make the machine feel slower. 2, thermal output and thermal throttling. Now, in theory, an 8-core chip should be able to run at higher clock speeds and give you higher performance for more of the time without it having to throttle down or having to use a very aggressive fan curve to kind of keep things under control temperature-wise. So it just kind of seemed the best performance point for noise, thermals, single-core performance, and just performance in general being stable and working well for my particular use case of it. So join me as we take this thing downstairs to my workbench and let's crack it open and let's start the upgrade process. Well, it's time for me to start tearing this thing down. Now, I've never, as I said before, really worked on one of these Mac Pros, so this is going to be interesting. I've got an iFixit guide up as well to have a look at, and I've got a supply of Pepsi Max caffeine free to keep me sane, and we're just going to methodically go through this and just kind of see what happens. So apparently there are some T10 Torx bits on here, which is correct. So I'm going to start undoing that. And lose a screw immediately. And then on this post, there is one as well, apparently. And then there are 2 more around here. And then this just lifts up. Now there's a connector here that I need to look at, apparently. So a little bit of dust there. And it looks like there are some T8 screws now. So let's swap over to my T8 driver. I don't think anybody would want to rip this ribbon connector. That would be a bad time. I don't know if these are captive or not yet. They're captive screws, apparently. It explains why they're not coming out. And then that just comes off this little bracket. And should just, with your fingernails, pull off, like so. And then there is a little Wi-Fi antenna, which you can also flick off with your fingernails, like so. And it shows that I got most of the dust of this out of this fan when I was cleaning it, but I'll give it another little go through with a little kind of paintbrush or something later, and I'll get the last of that detritus out. So I'm also using the lid as my iFixit kit to keep the screws in, and I'm keeping them kind of in the same place. Like I can see, for instance, that all the ones for the top of this fan bit are the same size. So I'm keeping them there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little connector and this little fan bit and put them aside somewhere out of the way. So with that little bit in there, so it doesn't get lost. Now I need to move on to the lower case, apparently, which is going to be T10s again, by the looks of things. And they are the same size as the other screws. And I'm going to put them in the little plastic section next to it. Almost loose now. It looks like this is loose. And there's no... Okay, so on this there are no bits, no ribbon cables. And you can see more dust on here. So as I said, while I got a majority of that kind of dust off when I blew the machine out, there's only little bits left. So, yeah. Now, it looks like there's 2 screws here holding things together. What size are these, I wonder? These are probably T8s. So we have to remove these interconnect boards here. And apparently you just... What do you just... work it? Like so? I'm going to very carefully do this with a little flat metal spudger here. Yep, there we go. And that came out nicely. Now these pins feel fairly solid, but I imagine you would want to be careful as to not damage those, which probably wouldn't be ideal. So a little lift very carefully in between the board here. In fact, I'm going to try and rock it off some more with my fingers because that is awfully tight. Ah, there we go. Actually, you can get this off with your fingers and your thumbs if you're very careful. Then it looks like T8 Torx, which hold the connector or the interconnector board down, which I should have swapped over to here. And this just pulls up. And I imagine same kind of thing of this connector, just flip it off. This yet again looks all right here. Yep, that comes off easy enough. And we have the interconnector board. Okay, let's lay that aside somewhere safely as well. So the power supply assembly apparently needs to come out next. So we've got to remove each side of this board here. Now it hasn't said to remove the RAM yet, but you know what? I'm going to take the memory out because I have a feeling that could get in the way potentially. And the RAM comes out just by lifting up this little tab and it moves to the side and you can pull it all out. Then it looks like in this section here you've got some little T5 Torx screws that need to be released. Obviously, iFixit don't sponsor this channel. I mean, look at the size of it. But I have been using the iFixit kits for a while now, and they're just brilliant, in my opinion, for the price. And I know most people kind of like use them anyway, and you know, it's not a new thing, the iFixit kits on the internet. But it's just for somebody who like works on computers like all day, every day, they are a really handy bit of kit. Oh, and that is a very tiny screw. And then apparently you lift up this shield, which exposes the power supply. And now we've got these T8 screws, which we need to remove here. And I assume they're main power pass-through connectors or something. I don't know how they're doing that or what that's for. But what I do know is I have T8 bit. As I said, I don't know if this just secures it or if this supplies power as well, because it kind of looks like they pass power through them, to be honest. They look like some form of electrical connector through little ribbony bits. So yeah, these look like bus bars and they are possibly soldered onto the main board through power bits. Let's have a look. Yeah, so looking at this, I'm guessing that the actual power goes through here because this is some strong soldered bits on going. Yeah, I would say that that is actually how the power is supplied to the central PCB of the Mac Pro, which is quite interesting actually. So it's obviously supplying, I guess, just 12 volts maybe. I don't know if there's any 5 volts going through there. It probably doesn't look like it. I don't know if the rest of the board here steps down other voltages for other things. So very interesting how that kind of works. And even more so on the power supply, you can see where you've got the actual mains AC input here, which is on the back here, and it just comes in through the IEC connector to this little bit which goes onto the board. So it's an interesting design. As I said, for a failed piece of technology, the Mac Pro, let's be honest, it actually was designed quite cleverly, just apparently not cleverly enough. And also looking at this Wi-Fi antenna, I don't think this is any form of upgradable chip. I guess it's not slotted, I guess it's part of the board. I'm not going to tear this down anymore because I don't need to, but it's just interesting to think about. So now what? What's the next step? Apparently more of these need to come out here, and then that should be everything you need by the looks of things, other than these screws here to actually get to the main board, the main CPU board area. And you remove the outer 4 of the 8 screws, so I assume this is actually what's holding it down to the heatsink itself. It's quite long screws, these. You got to be careful with these because these want to slip apparently. This one is getting caught. Ah, no. This is an interesting one. I can see what's happened here is this screw is trying to come off with the standoff. It's trying to pull the standoff out of the goddamn heatsink. Oh, that's no good. Why is it doing that? Is it out though? Have I managed to get it out enough? Oh, it's loose. Oh, it has come off. Oh, good. So as you can see, what has happened here is the actual standoff, which goes into the heatsink for this screw, has decided to actually come with it and unscrew rather than the CPU heatsink screw, which isn't too much of a big deal. I can get a little spanner or something on that to get that off, or just potentially just screw it back down like that. We'll see if I can get the CPU bit off. But I'm going to go take care of that off camera, have a clean up of this thermal paste, and we'll come back and we will upgrade the CPU next. Right, okay, so here's the issue with this standoff. I don't have a little ring spanner or anything that's adjustable, that's small enough to get on this. As you can see, there's a couple of witness marks from where I have attempted to hold it in with this, which, you know, clamped round enough. But the issue is it's so tight on there that whenever I try to turn it round, the actual force of me turning this just makes this want to slip. And to be honest, you can see there's already a little mark on top of this component here. I mean, it's fully kind of plasticky metal. It's fine. It's just a little kind of like surface scratch. But there is the real damage, the real risk of damaging some of these smaller components around there. So I'm just going to leave this on. In fact, it looks like it's kind of like changed with heat, like it's got heat marks, like it's been hot or something like that in this area perhaps, which wouldn't surprise me for a 2013 Mac Pro, considering they are known for baking themselves to death. So to be honest, I'm just going to leave it on there because this hasn't budged off the standoff at all, and when I actually put it back together, I'll just totally screw it all back together and it'll be fine. You don't have to worry about it, but experience tells me that if I keep going at this, I'm going to damage something when I have a dead machine, so it's not worth it, when in reality it doesn't really matter, and I should still be able to actually work this this little kind of retention board off round it. So we're just going to go ahead with removing the CPU kind of retention area now. Okay, so let's continue with the CPU removal. Now there are, oh Christ, these are on tight. These have got some absolute tightness to them. Jesus H. I'm just loosening them off kind of in an opposite pattern at the moment. Yeah, when I tell you that these are on there, I mean these are on there. Good Lord. I don't know if it's just like the small kind of grip and not much leverage you get or torque really with the little iFixit driver on stuff this tight, but obviously like you don't want to use like big automotive tools on these, especially at T8 torque sizes. So this will be interesting when we do it up. Might have to have a little cleanup of these threads perhaps. I think some of it could be the fact that there is some Loctite on these from the factory, maybe, but yeah, wow, that is tight. Guess this is putting the clamping force down on the socket as well, I suppose. That's probably what some of that is. Now you've got to be really careful as well when you're using this, because of how tough it is, not to slip. If you slip and, you know, scratch the board with your metal driver, that could be game over for a lot of this, because you'll have issues with, yeah, it's just actually the tension from, wow, it's literally the tension from the retention bracket that is so strong on this. Wow, that's mad. Oh, the CPU came off quite nicely in the end. So this being there wasn't an issue. So that is one E5-1620V2 out and one E5-2667V2 in. Very carefully lining all of this up. And that's sat nicely on the socket and nicely on the pins. So yeah, that's gone round there. I'm going to hold this to the board like, dang, this is tricky, Good Lord, this is actually genuinely quite tricky. So I've got to push this down, make sure this stays into place. This may not be the best view for a little bit because I've got a little bit of, not panicking going on here, but I've really got to get some of these bits in and start this off and use actually more force than I would have perhaps expected you'd have to use on this. Okay, so we're getting somewhere now. I'm just going to flip this over and make sure this is still, yeah, this is still retaining it the way it should be. So that's good. I would say, I wouldn't call this difficult, but I'd say you need to be very careful with this part. You need to have a little bit of strength and patience behind you. I'm going to try and get this evenly as possible because you need this to be seated down properly. Because obviously if the CPU pins aren't making contact with the CPU, you're going to have a bad time. So these do have a bottoming out point, which is good. So just nip these up to the bottoming out point. Be careful as well. If you feel like anything's about to thread, definitely be careful. It takes some experience working this. Thankfully, I work on a lot of old rubbish cars, so I've got a lot of experience knowing when something feels like it's about to strip. But those are tightened up. Oh, I need a stress drink. Oh, God. Okay. So that is tightened up. That is all in. That's not bent. That's not looking offset, off-centered. That all looks like it should. On here, all these pins are kind of mounted in the right place. The backboard looks straight and flush. So I know this is pretty much a clean CPU, but I'm actually going to run some glass cleaner. So we have some glass cleaner from Worth that we put in this. This was an old deodorant spray bottle thing, but it's no longer that. Obviously, it's a nice glass cleaner from Worth, and I find it's really good. A lot of the time, you don't actually need IPA for cleaning this kind of stuff. And it brings up all the nastiness of this. And the old thermal paste was very dry, by the way, And the old thermal paste was very dry, by the way, when I cleaned it all off. There's a couple of things you can do here. This, if it's being more stubborn, I like to use some of my Worth industrial cleaner. There we go. That's getting the most of that back and off. Anything that is nasty and crappy left in the area. And then just give it one last blast. The glass cleaner to get off any residue, and bang, we're all good. Lovely. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put some fresh thermal paste. I'm actually going to put it on the cooler side of things because it's going to make less mess that way, I would imagine. Or should I put it on the CPU? No, I'll put it on the CPU. Oh yeah, and if you think I'm showing you the amount of thermal paste I put on, you can jog on. I'm not that dumb. Not in this day and age of the internet where everyone comes for you. As Steve from Tronics Fix says, it's the perfect amount of thermal paste. And that it is. So that one dodgy heatsink bit is now screwing up nicely. Yep, that's screwed into place. And I can see that that is fully down and seated on the heatsink. So, as I suspected, not really much of a worry there. And it's very important when you're screwing into these as well to really make sure that you're starting off these threads straight and you're not screwing at an angle, because if you kind of like put these threads in and chew these threads out wrong, you're going to be in a world of hate after stripping things out. Yeah, it's not a good time. And this is another thing that sounds silly to some, but what I'm actually going to do is once I've kind of done them up is I'm going to back them off a little bit. And I'm just going to make sure that this is kind of fitting flush and seated and there's no movement on this, because sometimes these kind of want to move into a different point naturally, if that makes sense. So it may not be like fully straight, so just give it a little gentle wiggle and just see where it wants to seat, because when you start nipping up screws and things, the position of where it wants to sit on the heatsink, especially when there's not a lot of things as locations or guide pins changes. So it's always worth just backing it off a little bit and just giving it a little jiggle and seeing what feels right. And now that all feels right. I would say that is the CPU side of things done. And now we have to worry about the GPU side of things. So now it looks like there are 2 power points down here, perhaps. Or I don't know what this is, if this just holds onto the case. I don't know if it gets all of its power through this kind of ribbon connector, or if it also gets it through here, these bits. I don't know. We're going to find out. T8. That certainly looks like the kind of screw that is to hold something in place for power purposes. And that certainly feels like a flex cable of some sort behind, though I don't know. Actually, I don't know if I needed to take that off, but I've unscrewed it anyway, so we'll find out when I pull off this backboard of the GPU heatsink. Now these I think you have to be more careful with, because I think these are just direct dies. There are no heat spreaders on these from what I've seen. So even though I've never done it, you're potentially more likely with mounting pressure to crack the die on this if you don't kind of take things off in the right way, or if you kind of put it on crooked and apply too much pressure to one point. You know, it is more likely to crack a die, and then you've got a completely useless GPU, which are a pain in the arse to find replacements for, and they cost a lot. Oh God, no, it's done it again, hasn't it? I can feel that at least one of these, if not both of these, the bits for the heat sinks are stuck on again. Oh, yeah, it's happened on 2 of them. and I was right, actually. This is, look at this little interconnector board is obviously power for the GPUs, and it's providing, I guess, the 12 volt, what would be the PCIe power. But yeah. It's done it again. I don't know. I've watched a few videos on people doing this, and I haven't seen anybody who's had an issue with these standoffs just kind of coming with it. But yeah, as you can see, this old thermal paste is dry and flaky and not very nice. So we'll do one of these. I won't show me doing both. There's no point. At least this isn't as involved. Thermal pads seem okay. I'll get the most of the thermal paste off. I don't always get every single last thermal paste off from around the components because that depends. Sometimes you want to start scraping at it and you've got little fuses and bits and bobs and capacitors on the board, and I don't like to do that all the time. And I don't like to drown these components in like cleaners either. And so yeah, we'll just get off the worst of the gunk that you can with a little tissue and maybe like a little bit of cleaner of some sort. Get the worst of it off. At the very least, get what's coming off of the dang memory chips off. And if you can get it off around the sides and things like that of the actual die, the best you can, I mean, you'll be fine. I mean, you shouldn't have to worry about this. This thermal paste is non-conductive of electricity. So that's the actual chip cleaned up. Now I just need to get the mess of thermal paste off the memory modules. Right, that board is more than clean enough for me. And I have cleaned up the heatsink as well. I'll give it another little run over. And we'll put some more thermal paste on. Yet again, I'm not showing you how much I'm using because I know what the internet is like. But all I'd say is I'd rather use a little bit more than not have enough on there. Again, being very careful to apply even pressure with this and not crack any dies, because that would be a really bad day. But it's all feeling good. It's all going in nicely. And then I can move this power little bar and use my fingers to adjust that into place. Start threading these in by hand. Okay, so that's one board done. I'm going to go away and I'm going to do the other board now. And then, yeah, it just makes sense to kind of do that off camera, so we're not watching the same thing, and we'll start putting the machine back together and we'll go from there. So I'll see you in the next clip. Okay, so at this point what I've done is I have put the connector covers for the power supply back on and just got them there and done. All the boards are kind of back together, the main boards. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put on this little interconnector board. Now I've given it a little wipe down and a dust down, so we're all good in that regard. So this one's interesting here. We've got to bend it out the way and bend it over bend the ribbon cable over, should I say, and locate on these two tabs. And then in theory, yeah, it just snaps in. And then it's locating, obviously, this slot onto this kind of like, is it a PCI slot? I don't think it is, but like a PCI-esque proprietary slot, and then pushing it down, and suddenly there's a lot less flex in everything. T8's go on the top here, and then the last one on top here. Make sure it's evenly snugged down, which it is. Then we can just start snapping on the connectors for the graphics cards. Making sure they're all pushed down nice and evenly, which they are. There we go. And that's on like so. So the next step should be the bottom plate. And the good thing is, in my screw pile, we've only got piles for these screws. Or for these plate bits, should I say. Now, I'm sure this has got a specific location on the bottom it goes on to. Yeah, actually, looking at it, that makes sense. It hasn't got a specific orientation, but it's got cutouts for the poles. So it has, yeah, if you look here, cutouts where the pole bits go on, and the other parts just then go on like so. So, okay, we're actually all right. That's fairly straightforward. So it's a case of just starting to thread in the screws. And yet again, making sure you don't thread anything, because if you thread anything, that's not going to be a good time for anyone involved. One more round here. And again, push down, and that is all the screws for the bottom part on. So this bottom section is done. Now let's look at doing the top section. Right, now I have gone and cleaned out the fan, and that fan's looking pretty decently clean now. So the first thing I'm going to do is just put back on the Wi-Fi antenna, which is a bit fiddly. You've got to line it up. Probably can't really see what I'm doing here. And get it on straight, and that's it. That Wi-Fi antenna, if I bring it around here, is now, as you can see, clipped on nicely. And then it's a case of just pushing on now the fan connector, which I have done, and you've got to be very careful with that. This is a shorter ribbon cable. You don't want to ruin that. And then the bit with the captive screws goes on, and that is that T8s again? Yeah, that's T8s again. And that's it. That is everything connected. The Wi-Fi antenna is on. Everything's in place up top. The fan connector is on, and it just snaps on. And that pretty much, other than just doing up these screws, which I'm going to do now, is the main assembly and disassembly done. Okay, so that is all the screws done up. So what I'm going to do now is just put the RAM back in. And you can see that the slots here, as I said, I'll show you how it works. This mechanism, you just push it and the RAM slots come out, which is nice. And you just see that they're keyed point. Slide them through the little bit. Push them down. Push them in until you can feel them. Yeah, they're both in and seated. Click that side in. That side then clicks out as well. You can see how they're keyed here. Just literally slot the memory sticks in, make sure you got them lined up. You'll feel them snap into place. It's not like on your normal kind of motherboard where you've got two like snap bits here. You don't kind of have that. You've just kind of pressed them in like, and then you'll feel them go in, and that's it. Now we need to talk about the SSD upgrade. This is the factory Apple SSD here that we've got. And what I picked up online was an Intel P660 SSD, 1 terabyte one. because it says it's on a compatibility list. Now, for these to work properly and have the correct speeds and work with these machines, you can't just kind of put any NVMe SSD in them, from what I understand and what I've read. So you need to get a specific set of ones that have been approved, and I think it's... I can't remember what the exact specification requirements are off the top of my head. I'll flash something on the screen now. But this fell under the category of that. And I also bought this little adapter which converts it from the proprietary connector to a normal M.2. So pretty much all I've got to do now is take the SSD out, slot on this connector like so, make sure it's all seated, slot it down in the connector as far as it will go, and then T8 yet again. Just wash it in. Right, that's not straight, so I've got to line that up. Yep, that's now straight. Sorry you couldn't see that. And then bang, that's in. That is the SSD upgrade done. So as simple as that, really. Some may ask why I'm not transferring this cover over. I don't think this cover is kind of compatible being transferred over. I don't know. Don't really want to try. Want to keep it with this original SSD anyway. I can't remember if I said yet this is a used SSD, and I think I got it posted about £35. So it's helped keep the price down. And I haven't looked at any wear amounts yet, like any read and write stuff, see what the life of it is. But obviously, if it's horrendous and it's like on death's door, you know, I can use tools to find that out, and we can go to the eBay seller. Hey, this SSD is actually pretty much done. But if it's kind of within spec, then I think it's within spec for the upgrade, and it'll be fine. So now that's all done pretty much. It's just a case of putting the cover on and making sure it still boots. Oh, this is a scary part. Okay, everyone, so here's the scary part. I've plugged the power supply in. Nothing's gone bang. Nothing's caught fire. I've got all the connectors in that we need. Video, network, audio. I've got an SD card in with OpenCore Legacy Patcher on it. And Sequoia is on there. So let's hit the power button. Let's see if it blows up. Hey, this is looking good. The monitor's engaged. We have a bong. I think it hasn't found an operating system yet, obviously. Look at that. Look at that. Okay. That's good news. Okay, let's go to the EFI boot there and install macOS Sequoia. Hold on a minute. We need to speak about OpenCore Legacy Patcher. What is OpenCore Legacy Patcher? Now, for those that don't know, OpenCore Legacy Patcher is a piece of software that's been developed, I believe it's either by one person or it's community-based, I can't entirely remember off the top of my head, but it allows older Apple computers to run newer Apple operating systems by essentially tricking the operating system into running on an older machine. It's almost a bit like Hackintoshing, except it's with genuine Apple hardware and not random computer parts that have been thrown together to work. For the most part, it supports a lot of older hardware as long as that hardware meets specific requirements for the OS, and it's not just an arbitrarily enforced kind of cutoff point. Right, that's good. I can feel air coming out the fan. It's always a sigh of relief after an upgrade kind of like this. You know, wanting to know that the hardware works to starters, because for all I know, that CPU could have been dead. I could have had issues with the SSD. You know, I could have broken something while doing that, because that was quite intricate, obviously. But as of now, it appears that it's all kind of working. Okay, the drive showed up and I formatted it. So we have here Macintosh SSD, which I've just done, and it is showing up as a terabyte volume. So I think we're good to install. So I'm going to run the install now. And I'm just going to come back to you when we're in Sequoia, and we're going to just, you know, make sure that the hardware is showing up as it should. This is exciting news! Exciting news! So we are booted. Some of you might be going, what on earth has happened to the graphics side of things? There is an explanation for that, and that is because the drivers for the graphics cards are not yet installed on the system. But let's just look at about this Mac and see what we've got. And it says right here, we have got an 8-core Intel Xeon E5, 32 gig of RAM. And we can see hard disk now, Macintosh SSD. And if we look at Get Info, we can see that it is indeed coming up with the 1 terabyte drive. Now we need to sort out the issue with the driver's not working, and we need OpenCore for that. Let's have a little look at network settings now. So my network isn't actually working at the moment. I'm pretty sure it has no drivers either for the Ethernet or the Wi-Fi that's going to network. Oh, Ethernet is connected. Okay, so that is working. So let's see if we can go online and grab the latest version of OpenCore. Okay, so what this software is going to do now post-install is we've got patches and fixes to install. Essentially, they will patch hardware to make it work, because as you can see, the graphics drivers right now are just not there. They don't exist. And things like the Wi-Fi doesn't work either. So you're going to have an issue with that too not working. So we'll install post-install root patch, and we'll start doing the root patches. And then once that reboots, we've done the EFI partition on there as well, we should be able to boot and shouldn't have any issues with the graphics no longer working. Okay, so as we can see, OpenCore is now fully installed. I've got all the graphics drivers working, and things look lovely. They look as they should. Now in the background between the last shots, I've gone ahead and I've installed a few apps, and I've got this thing ready to benchmark. Like last time, I've got Max Fan Control installed, so we can have a little see what the temperatures are doing while we're doing things, which is, you know, going to be good to see how the temperature increases compared to things previously when we had just the 4-core CPU. So I'm going to start us off with a disk benchmark. Now in the last video on this machine, we ran some benchmarks on it to see what the performance was like, and I'm going to be referencing those numbers here to see what the increase is over stock configuration. Now in the last video, we got a write on the SSD using the factory SSD of 709.4 megabytes per second, and a read of 626.3 megabytes per second. So let's see how it goes. Okay, so we got a good increase there. Right, we're roughly looking at 1136.4, read currently 1337. So I'm going to let that run a couple of times just for it to all settle in and be happy. Okay, so what we have settled at here is a write speed of 1172.2 megabytes per second and a read speed of 1342.3 megabytes per second. Now, according to a calculator I'm using online, that is a 49.1922% difference in write speeds there, and apparently a quite astonishing 72.7421% difference in read speeds as well. So it's safe to say that we have got a good bit of extra performance from upgrading the SSD. Now, it must be worth saying, it's not as fast as when I ran the SSD when I got it in just a random PC motherboard I had knocking about to test it out and make sure it worked. That was pretty much like, I want to say it was nearly 2000 meg read and write on this, something along those lines. So obviously shows there is a kind of a bottleneck on the interface of the Mac Pro, or maybe with this particular SSD and how it's set up. But I would say overall that is quite the good increase in performance there, and it definitely feels snappy. The whole machine, it's one of those things to say that just using it and setting things up, you can notice a difference in kind of the speed and how quick it does things. So let's move on to now the Geekbench tests. As you can see here, we are showing up the E5 2667 V2 CPU, 32 gigabytes of RAM, yada, yada, yada. We are going to run the CPU benchmark and just see what it comes up with. Okay, and here we have the Geekbench 5 scores here. Now, previously, the machine with the quad core had a single core score of 871 and a multi-core score of 3,618. Now we have a single core score of 904 and a multi-core score of 6,562. Now, the single core score is only about a 3 to nearly 3.7% difference, it says here. But on the multi-core score, we get a difference of 57.8389. So basically 57.8% difference there. So that is quite the increase for really not a lot of money there. And as I said, you can seem to feel things around the system just at the moment. Probably that SSD is probably helping a lot with the snappiness, to be honest. It just feels so much snappier. That's good. I'm going to run anyway the actual compute tests. Now I'm going to run the metal test first. I don't know if there's going to be any real difference in these because I don't know how much the CPU is taken into account. But I'm going to run the tests and we're going to go from there, and we're just going to see if there are really any differences in that score. Now, what's interesting here with the metal score is it's essentially more or less the same. It went on the original machine from 23,630 to 23,310, which is probably within the margin of error. Yeah, that's like a 1.3% difference, so I'd imagine that's within margin of error. I'm going to run the actual OpenCL score as well, and we'll see if that shows any differences. Okay, what's interesting here is it's actually gone up slightly. Not by much, though. The original score was 22,320, and the new score on this machine is 22,395, which, according to calculations, is a 0.3% difference. So, essentially, within margin of error, it's no real difference there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring out the big guns of the benchmarking side of things. Cinebench 2024. Now that one is pretty much, as we've said kind of last time, not the best for these machines, but it really will bring it to its knees. And that will allow me to actually look at all the temperatures as well while it's doing that and just see how warm everything is kind of getting and if the fan really does much at all. So yeah, we will see. So temperature wise, we're now getting close to the end of the run. As you can see, we're pretty much 100% on the CPU at all times. The fan pretty much hasn't changed, which is funny. We're kind of running about 75, 76 degrees. The graphics card's in there idling about nearly 60. So that's probably why these things end up kind of getting a little bit cooked, I guess. I am going to run a custom fan curve on this. You know, I'd like to keep my CPU kind of a max about 70. We'll see. I'm going to, you know, run some fan curves and we'll just see how it ends up going, I guess. And I'll see how it ends up looking when I start doing some video editing on this and just kind of running all the different kind of loads and workloads on it. The Cinebench run is done. We got a score of 423 this time compared to 238 on the previous CPU setup, which is a difference of 55.9758% apparently. So a good little increase there. We're almost Apple M1 kind of levels there, which is good. Not quite, but we're getting there. I think with these benchmarks now done, it's time for me to use this machine a little bit and kind of report back on my findings and how it feels to use in general, and give you some kind of closing thoughts on whether I feel this was a worthwhile upgrade or not. Right, what are my closing thoughts on my time spent in 2024 with a 2013 Mac Pro trash can? I have enjoyed playing with the system. I am glad I bought it and glad I had a little fiddle around and it was fun to upgrade. However, it's not a piece of hardware I think I'm going to keep hold of. As cheap as this Mac Pro ended up being, I don't think it's actually one that I'm going to keep in my fleet of computers. Speaking of price, let's talk about things quickly. The Mac Pro itself was £172.95 when you include shipping. The SSD and the adapter was £43.39. The CPU was £15.83. Now, the display port adapter that I've needed to run dual displays and the thermal paste was about £10.86. Meaning the upgrades themselves actually were only about £70. which isn't too bad at all, really, in my opinion. Now that brings the total price to £243.03. Was it worth it? I think if you enjoy these systems and you like them and you want to keep one around, or you've got one perhaps and you want to get a little bit of extra oomph out of it, then yeah, definitely. I mean, for that price, it's not a terrible amount of performance. It's in an interesting and fun form factor. As I said, they're not the best machines for reliability. You know, usually that's the D500s and D700s that end up killing themselves. But as a kind of interesting almost art piece that you can use as a computer, and you know, just owning something, you know, that's kind of historical for not necessarily good reasons is kind of fun. It's kind of interesting. And I think if it wasn't for the fact I wanted to put the money back from that machine into something else, you know, another piece of tech or something interesting for the channel and just kind of to play with, then, you know, I may have kept it. But I don't really have the urge to keep it right now. I think maybe when they really bottom out and you can get these things like 50, 60 pounds, which apparently some people say you can, or if you can find them being thrown out, given away, then I may add another one into my fleet of gear just to keep, because I like having it there on the speaker. It looks interesting, it kind of looks fun. I normally have it unplugged and turned around so you can see all of the ports and stuff. In fact, it's actually plugged in and I'm operating right now. This is the system I'm running, and I've been editing this video on. I've done all the editing for this video on this Mac Pro, and I have to say it's handled it well. Using OpenCore Legacy Patcher to patch on macOS Sequoia has worked. It's been mostly stable, though every other time you start it up, it fails to boot and it does some weird things. So I've been backing up this project manually a lot and just trying to make sure, just in case it doesn't boot or something goes wrong, that I've got it and I can continue it on my M1 Mac Mini, which is now sitting here. Fun fact, little bit of a spoiler, there's an M4 Mac Mini on its way to me in the post as we speak. So this little thing is getting replaced with the new Tiny Mac. So let me know in the comments section below if you want me to, you know, unbox, do some filming on that, and maybe put it head to head with the M1 Mac Mini. Maybe even throw in some of the benchmarks from that thing and just kind of see how it looks in comparison performance-wise. There's also been some other kind of weird behavioral issues in OS X with the machine. Now, because you have to patch the legacy metal graphics drivers into it, you're facing more of an uphill battle. To be completely honest with you, I was actually running OpenCore for about a week on this on the old hardware, just fiddling around, getting an idea for what does and doesn't work. You have issues with Electron-based apps, I think they're called. So things like Discord, the graphics doesn't work properly. Google Chrome, the graphics doesn't work properly if you don't kind of apply some more patches and manual fixtures and manual fixings and things like that. So if you wanted to run one of these on, you know, a new OS, Sonoma, Sequoia, things like that, I imagine, you know, there's going to be lots of kind of manual patching, lots of updating, lots of fixing about. And the downside with that is going to be, if this is a machine you rely on to use a lot and it's your only computer, if it goes wrong, it can be a nightmare to fix. So I've been running OpenCore Legacy Patcher now on other machines for a while in our business, in our building here. And I ended up stopping using them because they just gave me problems. They just gave me problems, and if you do an update, that can ruin things. And most end users, as we know, for instance, like my father, bless him, he knows technology, he knows computers really well, but he'll still get caught out and accidentally update the machine, and then I'll have issues saying, why isn't this kind of old 2012 iMac? Suddenly it's not working properly, it's not booting, and then we had all the so. Long story short, OpenCore Legacy Patcher and things like that is great if you want to extend your own machine that you have, your older machine, and you don't want to buy a new one, but you have to be prepared to come along and kind of work with the issues and the stuff that kind of things. That stuff just doesn't work straight out the box all the time. If you're prepared to fiddle with that and you've got a backup machine, something else you can do, not everything you're doing is mission critical on it, then sure, great. But if you're trying to get real work done, while it's still more than capable, I had a little play around in Logic Pro as well, loaded up some old projects and things, and they worked, they ran, everything looked good, and I probably could do some recording on there should I want to. But I wouldn't want to deploy it in a real live studio environment because all it takes is something to happen and then you're in a world of headache. Now we have a bit of a problem with the longevity in these machines anyway, because macOS Monterey is the last operating system that this can officially run, but that is now pretty much hitting end of support. I'm pretty sure in November that's it, they've stopped support. There may be some security updates possibly, but there are just generally no more updates for it. It's an end of line operating system. These machines, that OS is now obsolete. And obviously without security updates, you don't really want to keep running that OS. So yet again, the only options you have are to run it with OpenCore Legacy Patcher, as I've mentioned, or run Linux on it. I haven't played around with Linux on it. I haven't got the time to, but there are videos from people who have done that and have good kind of results with it. So maybe that could be something you could do if you wanted to. We also have one more problem as well that we need to think about, and it's Apple Silicon. Now, I strongly suspect that Sequoia might be the last Apple operating system released that has any form of Intel/x86 support at all baked into it. If you look at the list of currently supported machines in Sequoia that run Intel chips, it's very, very low. And if this isn't the last one, or maybe the next one after at most, then I would be very surprised. Which means at the end of the day, the amount of new Apple operating systems you can run on this, even with the patches, will be limited as well. And lastly, it's the price of these things as well. Now Apple have released the M4 variants of their Apple Silicon chips, and they start with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Mac Minis, especially those with 8 gigabytes or entry-level 16 gigabyte setups from the M1 and maybe even M2 are going to be getting really, really cheap. I've seen M1 8 gigabytes 256 configurations of storage going for as low as about £200–250 now on eBay and other places. So you can get something, okay, you can't upgrade it, you can't upgrade the RAM or the storage, but if you want something that's more likely to work for longer and going to have a longer shelf life, you'd be really hard pressed not to consider one of these machines. So in closing, who is this machine for in 2024? I think it's now really down to a small group of enthusiasts and collectors and people who perhaps already have them and want to keep them going. Other than that, I couldn't really recommend anybody buy one, as cool as they are and as enjoyable as they are to work on and as a great piece of history they are. They kind of give me very much Apple G4 Cube vibes as well, and that kind of like limited time running form factor, not really many upgrades kind of thing. And I think this is a machine that, as time goes on, will actually garner more kind of like appreciation and traction, certainly in the collector and retro community. Not because they were good, but because they were different. So I'm going to put mine on eBay, I think, in a few days' time. I may have a little bit more fun with it in the time being, but I don't plan to make any more videos specifically on this machine. So if you have any thoughts on today's video, anything that we've covered content-wise, anything that you really want to say, drop them down in the comments below. Yeah, this has been a fun video. This has been a fun experience. And while I am going to move on this Mac Pro trash can, I may get another one in the future. Whether I'll do videos on it again, I don't know. I've kind of done them now. I don't really know what else there is left to do on them. But yeah, as always, I have been Will. This is the Will the Plank channel. And I will join you next time for some more kind of random tech videos.